So, for this week, we will be starting to work with the squirrel hair brush, and once again practicing the most important aspect of miniature painting, which is how to have control over the line work. And we have some excellent examples in our collection at WICMA. One or two of them we also have in our exhibition. This beautiful drawing of the equestrian portrait of a nobleman riding the horse, which is actually a preparatory study. In that you can see how there's this consistent line that is following and contouring the body of the animal as well as of the figure, and you can see how the portrait has been made with this beautiful consistent line. It's not too wavy, it doesn't break in between, the pigment doesn't pool anywhere, so there's this effortless flow that you see all over the contours. And you have a similar example of that, which is even more expressive when we see the two elephants drawing, in which there is almost like a calligraphic quality to the line work as well. So once there you have achieved the mastery and control of the brushwork, then you can express it in these wonderful ways as well. With our assignment, we will try to have a mark that is once again very light. So we'll be following exactly what we started off doing with the pencil studies, but now achieving it with a completely different medium, a water-based medium, and using this particular squirrel hair brush. So once we have this grid, then we can start using our squirrel hair brush. This brush also I get from the same place that I get the paper, in Sanganer in Rajasthan, and we can add a link to that if anyone wants to get these brushes. We were actually taught, when I was learning how to do miniature painting, one of the first things that we were taught was how to make our own squirrel hair brushes. So we had to hunt our own squirrels down and cut their tails off, wash the tails, dry them for a week or two, and then learn which exact hair to pick out in order to make a brush. And then for the head through which the brush goes, we would use pigeon's quill, which cuts from here, and then you use a bamboo stick. You can use a chopstick or something if you find a really small one. And the idea of the squirrel is that it has a really beautiful spring and a slight curve to it. If you use a sable hair brush or some of the more like German or European brushes, they're too straight, and the smaller that they go, the lesser hair, they don't have as much hair, so not a lot of water can contain in their hair. This squirrel hair, particularly the South Asian squirrel, the beauty of that hair is that it can take in a lot of water at its base, and so you can use it for a longer time, and yet at the tip it gets really, really fine, right to a really precise point, almost very similar to the point that we got when we were sharpening our pencils, that sort of needle-like point. But this curve gives it a really nice spring as well to it, so you can use it in every way, and that's exactly what we will be doing in our first assignment, learning how to use the brush in all different directions. And for this first exercise, you can use any watercolor that you want as long as it's black. It could be any make. We usually make our own carbon black, and that's a separate workshop, but for now we can just use any watercolor cake and take some water and wet the cake, and then because we are using really minute amounts of the paint, we don't really need any container. Usually you just use your hand as your mixing palette. So you can just put some pigment on your hand. So this becomes your base paint. You don't need more than this for the whole assignment really. From here we will now continue to make different grades of this paint. So we take a little bit water and make a lighter shade, almost becoming gray. Then you can take a little bit more water, make another even lighter gray, and so on and so forth. So this becomes your palette for the day. So for this assignment, what we are trying to achieve is a similar sort of line that we did with the pencil assignment. So we'll be doing a few squares of the vertical, horizontal, and then angular lines just to get our brush going. And you can also use the extra piece of paper to just empty out any excess water that you have in the brush. For example, let me show you. So you take some pigment. It obviously has a lot of water. We don't want to have a watery line. We want to have exactly the way we did with the pencil, a nice, consistent dry line. So you can empty out the extra water here. And then when you see that, all right, this is a good enough, dry enough line, then we can start with our line work. So this is the assignment. They'll be making these lines, and it is considerably more difficult to control than the pencil. And you will notice that once you start doing that yourself, because also in this we are trying to maintain a consistency. And when you're using water, the consistency goes all over the place. You have to make sure that you have the right consistency every time. Another thing happens when you're using a watercolor and brush. If you have too much water in the brush, when you bring it down right to the end, it will pool. We don't want that to happen. When you look at historical examples of beautiful drawings and prep studies that we have in our show as well as in other drawings at WICMA, when you look at their outlines of the faces and of the other aspects, the line never pools. You can never tell when the line finished and the other line started, because that's the control that we're trying to achieve in this assignment. So once you've done these lines, we can move on to the horizontal lines, doing the same thing that we did with the pencil. And you can see if you have the right consistency of ink in the brush, it can keep on going for a while. And then when it starts to get lighter, you can get more paint and then keep on going. And so that's our assignment for this, and then we go into our angles again that we did before as well. And then this side, and after that what we will do, which is different from what we did in the brush, what we did in the pencil, is that we'll also be using this assignment to learn how to move the brush in all different directions, something which you don't really do with a pencil in the same way. And that assignment is to make spirals. And it's not easy to make, and there's a lot of mistakes in that, but it's just more just about opening. It's like a warm-up exercise. And if the paint finishes, you pick up exactly from where you left. And then we do the other way around. This was, I just did clockwise. The next square could be anti-clockwise, and maybe we can do a row of those. And then we will move to doing, and that's how we will fill out our first grid with the brush. So I made a grid of 35 squares. I ended up doing 7 by 5 rectangle and then 35 squares. And so we can do maybe 3 lines of these lines, 3 rows of the lines, the 4 directions, and then do spirals. And then maybe in the final line that's left, we will do our flower study again. The exact study that we did with the pencil, now we will try with the brush. And then after that, we can actually move to our first brush assignment, which would be to take an example from one of the paintings in our collection in the ongoing exhibition, and then gradually starting a copy of that. So after doing 2 rows of these straight lines, very similar to what we did with our pencil, we are now doing it with the squirrel hair brush, the 4 directions of lines. We'll do 2 rows of that. And then we'll move to another exercise in which we learn how to rotate the brush in a circular fashion. And that's what I'm going to show you by making these spirals, keeping the same formula in mind that the line should be as thin as possible, as unbroken as possible. Of course, if the pigment dries out or the ink ends, you have to sort of go back in and dip some more. But otherwise, it should be unbroken and as close to each other as possible. This is quite a tricky exercise, but you first do it you can do it in one direction, like clockwise, for example, and then in the other square, you move to the counterclockwise. And then you can do and keep on repeating that and do 2 rows of that, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, of these spirals, unbroken, as close to each other as possible, and as light as possible. This really opens up your hand and creates a deeper understanding with how to use this particular squirrel brush. And then in the final row, we will do a similar exercise to what we did with the graphite of making the flowers. And we can choose any of the flowers that we did from the example from a few weeks back with the graphite. But in this, we will learn how to make the outline of the flowers and how to render the flowers using that pardakht technique but it is slightly different than the pencil because now we're using the brush. So we don't do the circular motions as such, we do more like tiny dash strokes and tiny stippling marks, and that's what we are doing here now on in these flower studies.